Good evening and welcome. My name is Hannah, and this is Into the Hollow. On this show, I talk about cases and encounters involving the paranormal and the bizarre. If you have had any strange experiences or encounters with the unknown and would like to share, please contact me at intothehollow@protonmail.com. A witch, a con artist, and a murderer. One woman in England made history after her crimes were exposed. Our story begins in the late 1700s. Mary Bateman was born in 1768. She became a servant girl as a teenager, however was fired after being found stealing small items at the house she worked at. During the 1780s, she became a minor thief and con artist who convinced many of her victims that she possessed supernatural abilities. By the end of the century, she became a popular fortune teller in Leeds, England, who prescribed potions which she claimed would ward off evil spirits, as well as acting as some kind of medicine. In the late 18th century, belief in witchcraft was still common across the country, and it was a belief Mary Bateman quickly realized she could exploit. She claimed to be a clairvoyant and able to speak to the dead using her abilities to save people from evil spirits, as well as cast spells and cure ailments. She became known as the Yorkshire Witch. She preyed on the vulnerable, using their fears of witchcraft to her advantage. She focused on herself, no matter the damage caused to others, and was confident in her abilities. This led to murder. Marrying her husband John Bateman, who'd she known only a few weeks, on February 1793, she soon proved that a life with Mary Bateman meant a life of constant moving to avoid the locals catching on to her scams and the authorities who would want her punished. Mary, always looking to expand on her scams, created a number of personas which she said she could connect with and carry messages to. These included a persona called Miss Blythe, a woman who could read the stars and fully predict the future who worked through Mary Bateman, and a Mrs. Moore, who could provide a screw-her-down service with Mary as her agent. Mary Bateman would persuade or encourage a person to believe that someone wanted to harm them, and that someone could be stopped if they were screwed down. If creditors were chasing for money, or a husband was cheating on his wife, they could be dealt with and the threat eliminated, for a price, of course. Her descent into murder first came when she targeted two Quaker sisters, the Kitchens, living with their mother above a draper's shop they owned. Mary made herself comfortable by working in the shop for them and becoming their friend and confidant. As usual, these unsuspecting women were charmed by Mary Bateman, and despite their Quaker beliefs, Mary managed to calm them just as she had done everyone else. When one sister fell ill, the dutiful Mary offered to nurse her through her illness, an illness that may very well have been caused by Mary herself. Using her alter ego Miss Blythe, Mary sourced medicines for the Kitchen sister. Medicines, unbeknownst to them, were laced with poison. She died, and within weeks her remaining sister and her mother became ill with the same symptoms, and they too succumbed to the terrible illness which Mary Bateman told everyone who asked was the plague. An explanation that served to scare off anyone from investigating the deaths through fear of being infected themselves. One doctor did raise his suspicions of poisoning, but with no family member left to provide consent to an autopsy, his concerns went unheard and uninvestigated. Under the cover of the plague infecting the house and shop, Mary stripped both bare, ensuring she received maximum profit for her efforts. Soon after, Mary and her husband moved again, distancing themselves from any connection to the Kitchen sisters and their deaths. In 1806, she created the Prophet Hen of Leeds, where the eggs laid by a hen were supposed to predict the end times. Villagers began believing this was true when the phrase, "Christ is coming," was on each one. However, this was later proved to be a hoax. Bateman had written the phrase on the eggs with acid and reinserted them into the hen. She once roamed the streets of Leeds after a major fire had taken place and begged for alms for the victims. However, she ended up keeping the donations for herself. Also in 1806, Bateman was approached by William and Rebecca Pergio, who believed they had been put under a spell after Rebecca had complained of chest pains and seen the supernatural, saying she was haunted by spirits and a black dog. She was told by her doctor that she was under some sort of spell and that he was unable to help her. The Perigos were visited by their niece, who suggested obtaining help from Mary Bateman, who she said would be able to rid her aunt of the spirits that were possessing her. They asked Bateman for her help in lifting the curse. Using her previously successful Miss Blythe ruse, Mary gave the Perigos instructions in a series of letters, which they were to burn as soon as those instructions had been carried out, conveniently destroying any evidence against Mary Bateman in the process. Various items, from linen to silverware and cash, were requested by Mary that had to be sent to Miss Blythe in return for her help. Next came the medicines that had been made up specially by Miss Blythe to be taken by Rebecca Perigo, and finally puddings that should be made with a special powder that should only be eaten by William and Rebecca Perigo. To begin with, eating the puddings produced no ill effects, but on the 6th day they tasted different and caused William and Rebecca to have severe stomach cramps and vomiting. While Rebecca regularly ate the pudding, her husband was unable to eat more than a spoonful. Rebecca's condition worsened, however, as directed by Bateman. A doctor was not consulted, and Rebecca, who continued to eat the pudding, died on the 24th of May, 1807. William Perigo continued to pay her for more than 2 years, until he discovered that one of the charms, which he and his wife had received from Bateman, was actually a worthless paper. He went to the authorities, who arrested Bateman the following day after William lured her to a meeting. Although she proclaimed her innocence, a search of her home turned up poison, as well as many personal belongings of her victims, including the Perigo couple. Bateman's trial took place in York in March 1809. The trial lasted 11 hours, though the jury took only a few moments to find her guilty of the charges of fraud and the murder of Rebecca Perigo. Immediately following the sentence of death from the judge, Bateman claimed that she was 22 weeks pregnant and thus unable to be hanged. The judge subsequently requested that the sheriff gather a panel of matrons to assess Bateman's claim. 12 married women were sworn into the jury and conducted a physical examination of Bateman, including that she was not pregnant and thus able to be executed. Bateman had a daughter at home, as well as an infant child in the prison with her. She supposedly mailed her wedding ring back to her husband to give to the daughter. It was reported by the Leeds Intelligencer newspaper that she continued her criminal habits even in the condemned cell, telling the fortune of one of her female attendants for a small amount of money. On the morning of execution, she was up at 5 o'clock for a communion service in the chapel. Mary Bateman was hanged on March 20th, 1809, in York's New Drop Gallows, before a vast crowd of onlookers just 3 days after her conviction for murder. By the time of her execution, the public were looking forward to watching a woman they believed was a witch be put to death for her crimes, and they wondered as to whether this witch could get herself out of the predicament she now found herself in. After her execution, her body was put on display in Leeds, and strips of her skin were tanned into leather and sold as magic charms to ward off evil spirits. Isn't it ironic that the witch who sold fake spells and poisonous potions was turned into a charm herself in the end? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed learning about this case, and I want to thank you for journeying with me into the Hollow. Until next time, good night.